Thank you very much for this opportunity. I would just provide an overview of the work that we have been doing on bringing down the climate change impacts to the regional scales and specifically to the river basin scales. And the special focus of this would be on addressing the uncertainties associated with the impacts and how do we address the uncertainties, how do we address the scaling issues arising out of the climate models, in as much as the impacts on hydrology and irrigation water demands are concerned, and river water quality, urban flooding, and so on. So these are the issues that I will be talking about. The three prominent signals of climate change, namely that the global average temperatures are increasing, the sea levels are rising, and the precipitation patterns. Now these have direct implications on large number of hydrologic processes. For example, the rise in temperature directly impacts the evapotranspiration, the water quality, apart from it having other implications on the change in precipitation patterns. The stream flow is directly affected by the precipitation, the intensity, frequency, magnitudes of floods and droughts, the groundwater recharge, and what is less known about the rise in sea levels is the salinity intrusion. Perhaps we know that it causes coastal flooding, but the salinity intrusion as the sea levels rise, that is of importance as much in as far as water resources are concerned. So we have a large coastline, and therefore it is important for us to look at the sea level rise, but most of our water resources come from our river basins, and in this context is how do water fluxes vary on catchment scale in response to global climate events. This also has implication on the groundwater recharge, and then on the water demands. Ours is a primarily agrarian country, and therefore about 70-75% of the water is being used for agriculture. First, we need to address the evapotranspirative demands of the crops apart from the other demands and so on. So there are a large number of issues that we need to address as far as our country is concerned in terms of the water resources. The way we go about doing this is that we use the climate models, global climate models. These are essentially, they operate on the global scales, and therefore by nature their scales are large. Typically we may get grid sizes of the order of 2.5, maybe they have reduced to about 2 degrees, 1.75 degrees, etc. But for hydrologic assessment of impacts, these scales are still very large. And therefore the first question that we need to address is the mismatch between the scales at which the global climate models operate and the scales which are of interest to the hydrologists. And that is where we talk about the downscaling. If you move from left to right on that figure, the GCM's ability declines. For example, the spatial scales, they are best at the global scales and perhaps all right at regional scales. But what we need is really at the local scales of the order of 0 to 20 kilometers resolution and so on. And similarly, you look at the variables that the GCM simulate, that's of primary importance to the hydrology. Look at the left-hand corner there, wind, temperature, air pressures, etc. These are well simulated, but what we need really are the evapotranspiration, runoff, soil moisture, and so on, which are not well simulated by climate models. And therefore, we address this issue of downscaling, that is bringing down from larger scales to smaller scales for impact assessment, as well as simulating the variables of interest to water resources using the variables that are well simulated by the climate models. So both these are achieved by downscaling. Then we use the distributed hydrologic models. Typically, this is a river basin divided into several grid points here. At each grid point, we simulate all these processes of interest to the hydrology. And then we also use the soil moisture here, the soil layers, and go down into the soil and then simulate that. So these are the distributed hydrologic models. Typically, they operate on grid scales. A grid may be of the order of 10 to 12 kilometers or 12 to 20 kilometers, depending on the type of models that we use. And each of these grid points, we simulate all these processes and then route it in some sense through the river basin to look at what is the water available in and how does it respond to the climate signals. So projection of climate change to the regional scale essentially then involves using the GCM outputs, the global climate model outputs, bringing down to the hydrologic scales and putting the extra additional information that is required by these climate models. For example, the topography, land use, land cover, soil characteristics, and all other essential information that is necessary for the climate models. That comes as an extraneous input into the hydrologic models. And we run these hydrologic models for a given climate model and then generate the scenarios at the river basin scale. When we do this, as the previous speaker and in fact Dave also mentioned, there are a large number of uncertainties associated with this kind of a procedure, because you change the climate model or you change the scenario, you get an altogether a different time series of projection completely. And therefore, there is a model uncertainty associated with it, scenario uncertainty. We are also introducing downscaling uncertainty. There are hydrologic modeling uncertainties, etc. There are a large number of uncertainties associated with these projections that we provide. And therefore, we need to be careful on making far-reaching statements as far as the projections are concerned. So instead of giving single-valued projections, we then provide time series or the ensemble projections. We use large number of models and large number of these downscaling techniques, etc., and then provide an ensemble of projections addressing the uncertainties arising thereof. These are typically the downscaling models that we develop here. Essentially, the idea here is that you develop the statistical relationship using the historical data between the climate variables of interest, which are simulated well by the GCMs, and the hydrologic variable of interest, let's say the precipitation or the stream flow, and hold these statistical relationships so developed, sacrosanct into the future. Now, the basic motivation for doing this is that the processes relationships themselves will not change, although the patterns are changing. So we change the patterns and then arrive at the projections. As I said, you look at the uncertainties associated with this. There are a large number of uncertainties, especially the climate model uncertainties associated with scenarios. The three different levels of uncertainties that we address is, first you look at all these models as equally likely. The projections are equally likely. Then you look at the immediate past, let's say between 1990 and present, and then see how best, which are the models that are best performing for this historical period. Again, because of the methodologies that we use what is called as a bias correction, by which we bring all the models together as far as the historical period is concerned. But then you are looking into the future, you leave them free, they start falling apart again. So we also look at how well they agree with each other into the future. And then provide, instead of giving single value time series, we start looking at the uncertainties associated with these projections in terms of the probability distributions. How are the distributions likely to evolve into the future? Now, there are a large number of methodological details here, how best we fit the probability distributions and so on. So this is for the drought indicator in Orissa region. By the drought indicator is evaluated based on just the meteorological phenomena, that is a standardized precipitation index that is generally used. And then from there, we start looking at the stream flow in the Mahanadi River. We ask the same, how the water available in the Mahanadi River basin is likely to change or in the face of climate change. We use similar methodology and then provide we fit the statistical distributions with respect to the historical data using relevant vector machines or some statistical techniques, and then provide probability distributions. Now, these distributions are arrived at based on ensemble predictions. A large number of time series are projected, and then we combine them in some statistical sense, and then provide probability distributions for these. Now, this kind of information will be useful in planning for the, let's say, next 20 years, 30 years, how the water levels are likely to change in the Mahanadi River basin. For example, this gives what is called in hydrological literature as flow duration curves. 70% exceedance flow, how it is likely to change with respect to several models. And then we address all of these uncertainties and then look at an integrated picture of what is happening on the Mahanadi River basin in terms of the agricultural demands, irrigation demands, in terms of the flood peaks, and integrate all of these into reservoir operation models, and then see how the reservoir operation can be tweaked or adaptive responses can be developed based on such projections that are available. The point that I would like to make here is that any projection that we talk about, any adaptive responses that we talk about are burdened with a large amount of uncertainty. Unless we address, quantify, and try to reduce the uncertainties, these kind of projections become slightly with a lot of limitation. Next, we address the question of urban flooding. As you are aware, because of urbanization, the local hydrology changes, the peak discharge is increased, the time to the peak decreases, and also the total runoff increases. Now, these are essentially caused by short duration, high intensity rainfall, and the question that we ask in this context is, how are the short duration, high intensity rainfalls likely to respond to the climate change? And this is the way we do this, that we first look at how historically the intensities are changing. For example, we look at the Bangalore floods. Historically, we look at how the intensities are changing for durations of interest to urban flooding. Remember, the durations that we are talking in this context will be of the order of 20 minutes, 30 minutes, etc. The distribution of the rainfall within that particular time is important. And therefore, we look at those kind of durations and see that historically the intensities for those durations in fact increased. And then we start looking at the global, we use the GCMs again. We have in fact used the CMIP-5 ensemble of GCMs and do some stochastic disaggregation, because the time during about is very small, and the GCMs operate really on large time scales. So we bring it down to daily scale first, and then do the disaggregation and bring it down to half an hour scale, etc., depending on the data availability, and then see how the IDF relationships are likely to evolve in the future. As you can see here, the short duration intensities between 0 to 2 hours, they are continuously increasing. Now, this is for various return periods we do, and various RCPs. This is a representative climate concentration pathways from the emission scenarios. Now the IPCC has moved to RCPs, so we do it for different RCPs, and then realize that with these large number of models used, the AR5 models used, the intensities are likely to increase. So on one side, we have messed up with the urban land use patterns, but on the other side, the intensities are also increasing, and therefore it has a significant implication on urban flooding. Next, we look at the water quality models and see how water quality is likely to affect. Now, these are standard models that are available in a river that is flowing pristine conditions. If you suddenly apply a shock in terms of its effluents, etc., how the river quality responds in terms of BO, DDO relationships, etc. These are very standard relationships. We use this and then look at what happens on top of, on this you superimpose change in temperature, change in relative humidity, change in precipitation, and therefore the stream flow, etc. All of these, when you superimpose, how the river quality responds. That's the question that we ask. And the first level of question that we answer is, if the temperature increases by 1 degree or 2 degrees and the stream flow decreases by 10%, 20%, etc., what happens? As you can see, the water quality response will be quite drastic in such situations. And for the Bhadra stream flow, Tungabhadra stream flow, we have done this. We also use the rigorous method of statistical downscaling, as I just informed. For example, the water quality will be typically affected by all of these: stream flow, average temperature, maximum temperature, etc. And then these we downscale and then use it into our climate models and look at how the DO, dissolved oxygen, or the water quality indicator is likely to change over future. Given the same datum status, how the river is likely to respond into the future. The last part is on irrigation water demands. We are looking at a command area. For example, the Bhadra command area is what we are looking at, and the evapotranspiration, which affects the crop water demands. We model the evapotranspiration with all these variables: air temperature, net radiation, wind speed, etc., which are provided by the climate models, and then translate that information into crop water demands. So first we look at the reference evapotranspiration, how the reference evapotranspiration is likely to change, for which we downscale the rainfall at that region. This is the Bhadra region, Bhadra command area. We also downscale, when I say downscale, it's all associated with large amount of uncertainty, spread like this. So we consider all that spread, and similarly we do this with relative humidity and wind speed, and also maximum and minimum temperature. The hydrologists know that all of these affect the evapotranspiration, and then provide the estimates for one particular model on how the evapotranspiration is likely to change in future for a given scenario. This is for A1B scenario. Like this, we do for several scenarios and then convert it using the FAO methodology into actual annual water requirements, how the annual water requirements are likely to change for a given model scenario combination. And then we address the uncertainties associated with it and then provide an ensemble prediction of what is likely to happen to the demands, I mean irrigation demands. The last question that we ask is, yes, we have seen a change in a hydrology of a river system, but can we attribute this to climate change? There are a large number of factors that are affecting the change. For example, you are looking at stream flows. Stream flows has in fact changed, the trends in the stream flows have changed. But can we say that this change has in fact been because of climate change? That's the question that we address in detection and attribution. Climate change, if it has affected a river system, leaves a fingerprint behind. And we capture this fingerprint by what is called as the optimal fingerprinting method, and then answer the question whether the change that we have seen in this particular system can be attributed to climate change, or there are a large number of other factors that are playing a dominant role. And for the Mahanadi River Basin, we do this for both stream flow as well as for rainfall, which are spread over 8 different locations. And then we conclude, these are the trends of the historical precipitation as well as stream flow in the Mahanadi River Basin. And these trends we now look at with a view to attribute these trends to climate change. And this is what we do in the fingerprinting technique. These are details. Essentially what we do is that we segregate the signals arising out of natural variability and arising out of the anthropogenically forced models. So essentially the question that we are trying to answer there is, would the anthropogenically forced models explain this change better than just the natural variability? And then that is how we attribute this cause. So for the Mahanadi River Basin, we could not unequivocally say that this change that we have seen is in fact because of climate change, because there is a large amount of land use change that has occurred in the basin. So we are trying to now look at quantifying how much of change comes out of climate change and how much in fact comes from land use change. That's current research. So in essence then, we need to address several questions when we are looking at regional water resources scenarios as they are evolving. Especially the stationarity, the question of stationarity, or in fact the lack of stationarity, because of several aspects, the construction of dams, construction of barrages, etc., that also kills the stationarity. And typically we look at the historical data and then assume that data or the statistics of the data to be stationary and then use it in future. Because of climate change, because of several other things, the stationarity is dead now. We need to look at future as a non-stationary future and then start modeling into those aspects. And there are several other scientific issues that we need to address. So in summary, I would like to say that the cliched statement that the climate change is global, but the impacts are local, we need to look at with a very high level of rigor of scientific investigation and acknowledge the uncertainties associated with any of these projections that are provided. Complete with these uncertainties, we must be able to provide useful information to the policymakers. Thank you for your attention.